For what purpose does the gentleman from Louisiana seek recognition?
Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to speak out of order for the purpose of inquiring to the Majority Whip the schedule for next week.
Without objection.
And also, Madam Speaker, I ask unanimous consent to revise and extend my remarks.
Without objection.
Thank you. With that, I'm happy to yield to my friend, the gentleman from South Carolina, the House Majority Whip.
I thank the gentleman for yielding, and I appreciate him letting me stand in today for the Majority Leader. I have talked to him, the Majority Leader, this week, and I understand he's doing very well, and I hope that he will rejoin you at this desk next week. Before I go to the schedule, I also want to thank the gentleman for joining me yesterday for a historic occasion, the dedication of H-150 on the first floor of this building, which happens to be part of his office. That building has been designated the John Joseph H. Rainey Room, and as you know, Rainey was elected to the United States Congress from South Carolina on December 12th, this past December 12th, 150 years ago. And none of us really realized it at the time, but H-150, now a part of the Republican Whip's office, was the Indian Affairs Room back when Rainey was here. Rainey was on that committee. And so it's so fitting and proper for that room to carry his name. And I want to thank the gentleman for being so kind yesterday and being part of that. Now for the schedule.
Yield on that.
I'm pleased to yield.
Yeah, it was a special day for all of us that were there, not just to celebrate Joseph Rainey, to have the Rainey family. You had direct descendants of Joseph Rainey. His great-granddaughter was there, as well as other relatives of Joseph Rainey, and to celebrate, especially during Black History Month, the first African-American ever elected to the United States Congress, to learn more about his history. And someone who was born into slavery, something we talked about, only in America can someone born into slavery just a few years after the end of slavery be elected to the United States Congress and come up here and fight for equality. And he had a great record for almost 10 years serving in Congress from the great state of South Carolina. And now there is a room, the Joseph Rainey Room, H-150, named after him in his honor. It was a truly special day, and especially to have direct descendants of Joseph Rainey come to participate in that ceremony, and be happy to yield back.
Thank you very much for that. And as the gentleman occupies the office, one of the offices that he served in, I'm proud to now be representing many of the communities that he represented here in this body, and thank you so much. Now for the schedule for next week. On Monday, the House will meet at 12 p.m. for morning hour and 2 p.m. for legislative business, with votes postponed until 6:30 p.m. On Tuesday, the House will meet at 10 a.m. for morning hour and 12 p.m. for legislative business. On Wednesday, the House will meet at 9 a.m. for legislative business. The House will consider H.R. 4445, the Ending Forced Arbitration of Sexual Assault and Sexual Harassment Act, introduced by Representative Sherry Bustos, which would end forced arbitration in cases relating to sexual assault and harassment, providing survivors with legal recourse to seek justice in court against their assailants. The House will also consider H.R. 3485, the Global Respect Act, introduced by Representative David Cicilline, which furthers our nation's commitment to LGBTQ rights around the world by sanctioning foreign individuals found to be complicit in violating the human rights of LGBTQ people. Additionally, the House will consider Carolyn Maloney's H.R. 3076, the Postal Service Reform Act. This bipartisan bill would strengthen the financial position of the United States Postal Service and ensure it continues to successfully carry out its mandate to deliver mail to every household and business in the country. Lastly, the House stands ready to act on the Build Back Better Act, as well as the Freedom to Vote, John R. Lewis Act, should the Senate amend them. And of course, we will act on appropriations, hopefully on an omnibus bill, but we will not allow the government to shut down. Additional items may be possible, and I'll yield that.
And thank the gentleman. As it relates to the funding of government, February 18th is the current date of expiration for government funding. The gentleman knows we're not scheduled to be in that week, so next week would be the last week that the House is scheduled to be in session prior to that date. We haven't seen any agreement on a broader long-term package. There has been some talk we've been hearing there may be a short-term CR brought forward next week. Does the gentleman know if there is any anticipation of a continuing resolution to be brought forward next week? And if so, is there a length of time that's being anticipated if that legislation were to come forward next week? And I'd yield.
If the gentleman yields back, yes, we've heard all of those discussions, and we are hopeful that something will come forward next week in the form of an omnibus. But if not, we'll respond appropriately when we get to that point.
All right, so we'll determine whether or not that happens. If there is a date that the gentleman's aware of, if there would be a short term, we'd be interested in seeing that.
I'm not aware of a date, but I would hope that if we do not get an omnibus, there will be a short-term CR, because the gentleman knows that getting the omnibus is very, very important to our constituents back home, so that people can plan their lives sufficiently. And he and I both are very concerned about the effectiveness of our representation of our constituents.
And thank the gentleman. Hopefully those negotiations can escalate. As it relates to a few weeks from now, the State of the Union, it was announced, will be March 1st, where President Biden will come here to this chamber to give his annual State of the Union. And we know last year's State of the Union was a very different look in terms of a limited House chamber. Does the gentleman know the protocols that are being planned for this year's State of the Union? I yield.
I thank the gentleman for yielding back. I know that the Speaker is in consultation with the attending physician on what the protocol for this year might be. In the weeks ahead, as we approach the date, the attending physician will make recommendations based on the current state of the pandemic. I think as all of us are very pleased with what we were hearing about the pandemic, that it is being very favorably, moving in a very favorable direction, and I'm sure the attending physician will take all of that into account when he establishes the protocol for the State of the Union address.
Thank the gentleman. Hopefully, as we talk about the broader issues relating to opening things back up, hopefully we can get the House fully operating again, ending proxy voting, getting committees to meet in person again, because across the country you are seeing more states open, more communities open, businesses open. And if you just look this past weekend, you had red states, blue states. In California, you had the NFC Championship game. Over 73,000 people were in SoFi Stadium to watch that game. From all the footage you saw, very few people had masks on. You didn't hear of incidents, but you saw in the state of California, 73,000 people gathered together. In Missouri, for the AFC Championship game, again, over 73,000 people watching that game. For those of us from LSU, as the gentleman knows real well, we're excited about Joe Burrow, Jamar Chase, Shelvin, other LSU Tigers going to the Super Bowl for the Bengals. But to see that many people, and we would understand for the Super Bowl, there'll be over 73,000 people there as well. Is there any reason that science changes in California or Missouri when you get to D.C., why we can't have a full House chamber here? We've been hearing we might only get 25 tickets in a chamber that typically holds over 500 for a State of the Union. And there's clearly no science that has come against what we saw in those stadiums with over 73,000 people. We would sure encourage that we open up the House chamber, not just to the State of the Union, to voting in general, to getting the House functioning again, to show the rest of the country that's frankly already getting there themselves, that we should and can open it back up again. And I would yield.
Thank you for yielding back. I like the gentleman. I witnessed those games over the weekend, and I don't know why you want to remind me of the last time you and I shared a stadium with Joe Burrows, but I do want you to know I was pulling for him over the weekend, and that's tough for this Clemson preference guy to do. But I enjoyed those games, and I'm sure that all the people who attended them enjoyed those games. Now, what I'm sure the attending physician will be taken into account, he will probably get the reports from the aftermath of those games, and will be guided by that. And I'm sure that if the day or two following the games, everybody was well, he'll take that into account. But then he'll look and see how people fared the next day and the day after that in order to establish the protocol. And I'm perfectly willing to wait to hear from him. Now you're back.
And thank the gentleman. And as we've seen some more reports coming out, Johns Hopkins just came out with new reports that talk about, frankly, detriments of shutting down, and how, when you look at schools especially, there's a lot of science that shows that kids that are in the classroom are not only learning better, but having better health outcomes than in those schools that are shut down, where theoretically they're sitting alone by themselves, which, as we know, that's not what's happening. In a controlled environment, it's actually better for those students. You're seeing in other environments, if you're only looking at a silo of cases at a stadium, but you're not looking at cases that are going up in places that are shut down, you've got to look at the whole picture. And I think too often, some people have only cherry-picked data, and it's been at the detriment of the overall picture. And so the science ought to be clear and vivid in its description of what really is happening out there across the country, in states that are fully open, in states that are more shut down. But again, red state, blue state, last weekend was a really good example that you can open things up again, and people are making choices. People know what's out there, and whether they're home alone, theoretically, they're still getting COVID in those places where things are shut down. And so we would sure hope that the science would not just look at a silo, but would look at the whole picture, as other scientists have done in these scientific studies like the Johns Hopkins report that just came out yesterday show. There is a bigger picture. We are hearing reports that it would be a limited number of tickets available. Maybe that's premature, but if the gentleman's saying that you're waiting on the doctor to make those recommendations, then maybe the number we were given a few days ago of 25 limitation is a premature number, and hopefully that opens up. I'd yield to the gentleman if there's anything else to add.
Thank you for yielding. You're absolutely correct. I agree with you. The number that was announced previously is based upon situation as it stood at that moment. I suspect that if things change dramatically in the next week or two or three, that number may go down. Everything else may get back close to normal. But I come from a pretty red state, and the reviews are pretty mixed as it relates to even school children. Some schools are doing well, other schools aren't. So it's not just what state you may be from, but a lot depends on what community that you live in. And we have a community here that we all enjoy living and working in. And I'm sure that the attending physician will take into account things that exist in and around this community in making his decision as to how we should conduct ourselves during the State of the Union. Are you back?
Is there an expected date on when that protocol will be released?
No, I have. You back?
yield, yeah.
Thank you for yielding. No, I don't have any idea and have not been informed as to what date that decision will be made. But I'm sure it will be made in good enough time for us to conduct ourselves accordingly.
All right, and
Are you back?
I'm glad to hear the gentleman's update as well on the Majority Leader's health. We miss him here and look forward to seeing him back here. He's left things in very good hands with the Majority Whip, but we also look forward to the day when he returns, hopefully next week. And that's encouraging news to hear as well. And unless the gentleman had anything else, I'm prepared to yield back.
No, nothing else. Are you back?
Madam Speaker, yield back.